So, some Resident Evil 1 remake rumors have been making their rounds on the internet today, as a supposedly very reliable insider has revealed that Resident Evil 1 is getting another remake for the series' anniversary in 2026. And as someone who really loves Resident Evil 1, I thought that a rumor like this would get me more excited than I am now. I expected to see news like this and tweet out something like, "Let's fucking go." But instead, I tweeted this. And it led me to making this video right now, because I'm excited, but I'm also kind of like, did we really need this? So I just wanted to ramble a bit about my thoughts regarding this rumored remake, regardless if they end up being true or not. And if you like this video or other discussions and rambles like this, be sure to check out my channel and maybe even subscribe, as it really helps me out. But let's get started, and let's take a look at the rumor itself first, so we have some actual context. All we know is basically that Resident Evil 1 is supposed to get a remake in the same vein as Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4, and that it will be made in the RE engine. Which doesn't stand for Resident Evil, by the way. It actually stands for Reach to the Moon engine. The more you know. And because of that, it'll also have a third-person over-the-shoulder camera perspective and stuff like that. But as far as I know, that's basically it. And when I first read this, instead of being filled with excitement, the first thing that came to my mind was like, this has the potential to be really cool, especially since I absolutely adore the original and the remakes, but I really love the original remake. And I don't know if this is gonna be able to top that, as the OG is honestly a fucking masterpiece. Oh, by the way, when I say OG in this video, I'm not talking about the OG, I'm talking about the GameCube remake, the one that's readily available on modern platforms nowadays. Like, that version of the game, the one that it says there on the box. Just so we are clear. But I played this game maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and while the controls definitely took some getting used to, I honestly thought that it held up surprisingly well. The atmosphere is impeccable, the gameplay is fun, and the puzzles are really well crafted. The game is very similar to a Resident Evil 2, as it's also focused on one single location. In Resident Evil 2 that is a police station, but in Resident Evil 1 that is the mansion. And over the course of the game you really get to know that place. You know where all the locked doors are for when you eventually get that key. You know where those bullets are, which you couldn't pick up at the time because maybe your inventory was full. You know where all the enemies are. You know specifically which ones you left alive because you ran out of ammo, or which ones you killed, both of which being very important, as sometimes a body would disappear or reawaken. But while you might think that you know the mansion true and true, it always has some surprises left for you, and those surprises are only strengthened by those fixed camera angles. While they're definitely not for everyone, the mansion is built for these angles. The tight, winding corridors, the camera highlighting specific elements of each room, that enemy that might or might not be there. You hear something, but he's just outside of your field of view, or maybe that's just a noise coming from the outside. You walk past the same hallway that you've walked through dozens of times, but right when the camera switches away from the window, you hear the glass breaking and something has entered, but you don't know what it is quite yet. So while you might know this place, or while you might think that you know this place, you're always vigilant. And while yes, Resident Evil 2 also had that to a certain extent, and I do really like the police station, in my opinion the original location of the mansion has not been matched. And as I just mentioned, those camera angles are a really big part of what makes it work. So it is kind of hard to imagine the Spencer Mansion with a third-person over-the-shoulder camera. But at the same time, I guess that's what all the original Resident Evil 2 fans thought as well when that remake got announced. I wouldn't know, as I only got into this series sort of recently, and I haven't checked out the original RE2 or 3 for that matter yet. But I'm gonna touch on that in a second. The point that I'm getting at is that while from a pure gameplay perspective, gameplay, combat, cutscenes, voice acting, graphical fidelity, all of that stuff, Resident Evil 2 definitely tops the first game. But there's something about Resident Evil 1, there's something about the mansion, there's just something about this game in general that, for me, has not been topped in the Resident Evil franchise. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely adore this game. I think this game is fucking phenomenal. But there's something about Resident Evil 1, man, that it is still my favorite of the quote-unquote classic Resident Evil games. And it's not specifically because of the setting or because of the story, it's everything together. Even if you would take the objectively better parts of the remakes and apply them to the setting and the story of the first game, it wouldn't necessarily make a better game, as it's the full package that counts. That whole experience is what makes Resident Evil 1 the superior experience, in my opinion. And I'm not sure how much that experience would be elevated if we add those remake elements into the mix. Another point that I wanted to bring up is that Resident Evil 1 is readily available. Like, I have it right here, it's part of the Origins collection, it's on PlayStation, I can play it on PS4, PS5, I'm pretty sure it's on Steam, it's most likely on Xbox, and I'm not sure if it's on Switch. But that being said, I don't think any Resident Evil games are on Switch, besides for the cloud versions, but hopefully that'll change with the Switch too. That is besides the point though. The game is readily available, that's what I'm trying to say. And it still looks very nice, and it is definitely playable, which kinda makes me think that some other Resident Evil games might need it a bit more. Like, I was never against a Resident Evil 1 remake, but Code Veronica is right there. I played Code Veronica recently, and while I absolutely loved it, it hasn't aged the best. It definitely hasn't aged as well as Resident Evil 1, that's for sure. But as I said, I'm also not against this remake, especially because looking at their track record, I am very excited, because I loved all of the remakes so far. Yes, some of them, when I say some of them, I basically just mean Resident Evil 3. Some of them were a bit disappointing, yes. If I played the game on release and I paid full price for it, especially comparing it to the original Resident Evil 3 from what I've seen, I would have probably been very disappointed as well. But just as a game that you can get for pretty cheap nowadays, this game is really, really good. And they definitely learned their lesson, as Resident Evil 4 was fantastic. As a fan of the original game, I adore this remake. But most importantly for this video maybe, while this game is fucking fantastic and I adore it, and it's also a fantastic remake of this game, it also stands really well on its own. It doesn't replace the original Resident Evil 4 for me, and they both stand next to each other as two brilliant games. That might sound a bit weird since both of them are literally just called Resident Evil 4 and they have the same plot beats, the same characters, etc., but they change quite a bit. From completely redesigning locations, to cutting a lot of segments, to adding in entirely new sections, expanding on a lot of characters, and even giving some of the characters quite different characterizations, but at the same time it really respects the original to its core. It doesn't go against it, and because it does so many things differently, to me Resident Evil 4 doesn't try to replace it, it stands next to it as a different take on that game. I don't know if I'm making sense here, maybe it's just the vibe that I get from both games, but I hope that some of you get what I'm trying to say. It also helps in this case that the original Resident Evil 4 is readily available, as I mentioned earlier, and because of that I feel like they were able to take a bit more creative freedom with this remake, as the original is literally right there, and for many people it also didn't need a remake. And I feel like since the first game is just as readily available as the original 4 is, and just like the original 4, it isn't really in dire need of a remake, I feel like that's why it'll have me feeling similarly to the remake of that game, in the way that it can try to be something different. It doesn't have to be a pure remake because that game doesn't need it, and every single piece of the original experience is vital to it, so it wouldn't really work or be improved that much in a one-to-one faithful recreation. But if it goes more into the reimagining route, if it tries to stand next to the original, just like with RE4, we could end up with two great games that just happen to be called RE1. It is a bit sad though that Resident Evil 2 and 3 aren't in this situation. Like I mentioned earlier, I still haven't played the original 2 and 3 yet. I definitely will at some point, but I would honestly just love a HD remaster in the same way that Resident Evil 4 or Resident Evil 1 got. I feel like that would even help the remakes, as it would make them stand more on their own as well. A lot of the criticisms that Resident Evil 3 has might even fade away with that, since if you want the OG, here's a remaster. But if you want this new and different take on it, here's the remake, just like with Resident Evil 4. But that's a bit of a side note though, and a bit of a side rant. To get back to the point, I'm not doubting that this Resident Evil 1 remake will be a good game. As I said, I feel like it's gonna have me feeling similarly to Resident Evil 4, and that remake is among my favorite games of all time. I'm pretty sure it's in my top 20. I adore that game, and I'll probably adore this remake of Resident Evil 1 as well. But I just really love the first game as it is. I don't think it needs a remake. I'd rather have them do Code Veronica, because with Resident Evil 1, we kind of have the perfect version of that game. We have the perfect version of the Spencer Mansion, and I feel like with the remake, while it will probably be amazing in its own right, I don't know if it's going to be able to recapture that feeling. I don't know if it's going to be able to top that. It might still be a really good game, I'm confident that it will be, but will it be as good as the original? Because reaching that same bar and surpassing it should be the goal of any remake, or even reimagining, because why else would you revisit and remake this game if it won't live up to the original, especially when that original is literally right there and readily available. Lastly though, I do want to say that I definitely understand why they're remaking this game. We might not need a remake, but looking at Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4, and then looking at Resident Evil 1, it does kind of look out of place, so I completely get that they want to make a version of Resident Evil 1 to stand next to those games. And it will also bring in a lot more people, because there are many people who just can't get used to fixed camera angles or tank controls, so it definitely makes sense to remake this game. It will definitely sell well, and then more people get to experience the story of the original Resident Evil, which is always a good thing. Again, it's not that I think that they'll ruin the original, it's not even that I think that it'll be a bad game. Their previous remakes stand on their own enough to justify their existence, and they also respect the OG at the same time. I'm just not sure if we need it, and I'm especially not sure if we need it right now. But with that, I think I covered about all of my thoughts. Again, don't get me wrong, I am still excited for this remake if it ends up being real, even though I'm not sure on whether or not we need it. Resident Evil games are always a good time. I love the original, I love the other remakes, so I'm sure that I'll enjoy it when the time comes, and I feel like once we actually get to see this remake in action, my excitement will definitely shoot up. I'm sorry if this video is kind of a mess, or if this video is kind of nothing, by the way. I just had a lot of thoughts on this one headline. Like, yeah, I made my tweet about it and I talked about it with some friends, but I had some more thoughts that couldn't fit inside of that character limit. I'm also very curious to hearing what you guys are thinking about this remake. I know that a lot of people have been jumping from excitement just from that one headline, and that's fully understandable as well. But to me personally, I do think that once you can get over those tank controls and the fixed camera angles, this game holds up extremely well, and there's a reason why the original had those camera angles. So it's kind of hard for me to be full-on excited, especially when Code Veronica is literally right there. But that's it for this video. Again, I really hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it though, be sure to leave a like and a comment. Also subscribe to my channel if you want more like this, but also if you want more scripted reviews and all of that stuff. Follow me on Twitter if you want to see my quick thoughts that I put out before making a video like this, because I also don't make a video on everything. Videos take long, tweets take like 5 seconds. But yes, any support is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and hopefully I'll see you all again soon.